way it's going to be. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Welcome to the Reckoning Brothers podcast. Scott, Mark, and our producer, Josh. Mark, how you doing today, buddy?
Man, I'm just keeping a low profile and defending the American way of life. Scotty, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'd like to think I'm defending the American way of life, although I can't really articulate exactly how. But crazy.
Even though you used to be a tanky, my brother's a tanky.
What does tanky means? Communist?
Tanky means communist, means Stalinist.
Yeah, I was over that by about the time I was 20.
I mean, there was a lot of stuff about this on the internet today, and it's crazy about, so many people breaking up with family members and friends about the election. And I'm like, and my personal experience with this, my brother is a Stalinist. He voted for Gus Hall like 2 or 3 times. Gus Hall was the perennial Communist Party USA presidential candidate for years, and he was a literal Stalinist.
So you're not talking like Eugene V. Debs style.
No,
you're talking far to the left, hardcore ass.
I'm talking about an Angela Davis, Jarvis Tyner, Gus Hall, straight up Brezhnev Stalinist.
Like with no American flair, just a straight up fucking
straight up fucking communist. And everybody loves my brother.
And you guys can get along despite elections like this.
But we don't talk politics very much because all he wants to talk about is fishing. But it was just so very sad. I mean, I saw so many videos and stuff and tweets and stuff about people breaking up with their family members because of who they voted for. And, one of the most annoying people in Hollywood, I'm sure he's a very nice person, George Takei, Star Trek, Mr. Sula. And he goes, one of the reasons we have to turn away from anybody that voted for Donald Trump is because people in Ukraine are going to die and it's unforgivable. My reply to George Takei was, my parents didn't turn away from any of their Democratic friends or family or anybody they knew, colleagues or what have you, because they voted for Franklin Roosevelt, who put your family and 120,000 Americans in internment camps. They didn't turn away from their Democratic friends because when Lyndon Johnson put 675,000 troops in Vietnam, killed 50,000 Americans and 2 million Vietnamese. If you're going to break up with friends and family because somebody they voted for, because somebody they voted for has moral failings, you're going to die alone.
Yeah.
You're going to die alone. The other ones were Trump's going to deport immigrants. President Obama campaigned on deporting criminally illegal aliens. He deported 3 million of them.
Not just that, but Mark, I'm sure you saw there's a bunch of women that are just simply going to stop having sex with men because of this election.
Yeah, I saw them.
Did you see that?
Too. I saw them all too, and
a lot of them are not, gonna happen.
It's like good riddance to bad rubbish. Yeah, there's that happens sometimes too when you see.
I had a stat to this. We're talking.
So, I think what we're going to talk about tonight, Scott, you sent a text earlier. We just do it. What, Josh?
I want to add a stat to this. You're talking about this, so I want to continue.
Yeah, please.
Google searches right now for move to Canada surged by 1,270% in 24 hours.
Of course. And not surprising at all.
No one's going to do it.
The country, New Zealand,
less than 100 people.
For one thing, it's hard to move to Canada. I mean, you just can't cross their border and go there and get put up in a hotel room and get a food stamp card.
And why does nobody consider the feeling of the Canadians here? Do you think they really want those people there? They're like, nah, you're good. Okay. Unless you can mine shale oil or something in Saskatchewan, we're not really interested in having you here.
One more thing.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Immigration, the New Zealand's immigration website has 25,000 new U.S. users since November 7th.
And guess what? None of them will be let in. It's people don't realize, it's extremely difficult to even get temporary residency status in another country. They don't. People cross our southern border and come here and apply for asylum or not apply for asylum, and and all the NGOs move them in, and then they get bused to a city, etc. That doesn't happen in other countries. We're the only country that does that. I mean, England lets in a lot of migrants, France lets in a lot of migrants, and and Europe has had the migrant problem from North Africa and so on. But if you wanted to, like, I have two friends I worked with at my last job. They both wanted to move to Portugal. They're both trans. They're both very nice people. They wanted to move to Portugal because they figured that life would be better for trans people in Portugal. And I said, guys, do you know how difficult it is to move to Portugal? Do you know? So I went on a couple of websites. I mean, I inherently knew. I mean, I worked for the federal government. I was in the executive branch. I worked at the fucking White House. I know what the State Department, how difficult it is to get somebody at the State Department to be an advocate for you, and how difficult it is to emigrate to another country. Other countries have strict emigration laws, emigration with an E, not an I. To emigrate there, even to get a temporary residency status, or the communists that say, oh, well, I'd like to go to Cuba. Good fucking luck. You have to have a relative in Cuba to go to Cuba. You have to have a relative that lives. You have to be able to show European countries that you have so much money in the bank. You have to give them your bank account information. You have to have a job. You have to have all that stuff all set up before you go, and then they may consider a temporary residency thing for you, much less citizenship. Okay, we're going to move on.
That I appreciated the rant, and I think it brought light onto. Yeah. People are ignorant about things like that. They just are ignorant until they find out. Because how would you know unless you do the research? But I'm sorry, Mark. What did you want to segue
No, it's
into?
okay. I mean, you asked me earlier, like, you know, you mentioned that a podcast, anything should have. A podcast isn't going to be interesting without interesting people, and I'm kind of an interesting person. I think you're a very interesting person. Josh is our producer. He's not very interesting.
His handsomeness makes up for that,
His
though.
handsomeness speaks up
Yeah.
for it. Yeah. Actually, he's a star. That motherfucker was a star.
Oh,
That
it
dude, I
still is.
mean, oh my God, the chick magnet when he
Hey,
was young.
hey,
Ooh, yeah,
We can stop tickling each other's balls, though. Mark, you actually do have an interesting history. You
I
said
have met,
you were a presidential aide. You've flown all over the world. You've
I've
met.
been to, I've been to 30 countries. I've met so many people. I've known a lot of people. I've met. So you could throw it out to me, or I can go through it. Like, I've known presidents, I've known actors, singers, movie stars, met and seen. Um,
You actually wrestled Teddy Roosevelt at the White House back when they did that. I don't know if you've heard those stories. Mark was there, and you barely lost, which is probably the most
I
impressive
mean,
part.
I went to work for Ronald Reagan when I was 18 years old, so I got to meet a lot of people. I got to meet Anwar Sadat, you know. I got to meet Richard Nixon, and then I got to work for Richard Nixon for a couple of months when, he was a former president. He's the most interesting person I've ever known.
Hmm.
Reagan and Nixon were the two most interesting people I've ever known. My former boss, Nofziger, a very famous man, very brilliant man, was extremely interesting. Um,
Well, you mentioned to me that I didn't know. You had dinner with Alexander
I
Solzhenitsyn.
did have dinner with Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and I meant
I
to,
can't
like,
pronounce that name. No one can. He can't pronounce that fucking last name.
Solzhenitsyn.
Say it
Um,
again.
Solzhenitsyn.
Got it.
And it's been so many years ago, I can't even remember if it was Connecticut or Vermont, but it's a New England state. I think it was Vermont. He moved to a little place in Vermont in the 80s. And he came to Washington and met with some people in the Reagan White House. And then he invited people to have dinner with him. And there were a lot of people there. The translator wasn't all that great, so I didn't get to absorb everything. But and he spoke a little bit of broken English, but I mean, he's one of my heroes. And the one thing I walked away from that dinner with was like how so fucking lucky I was to be born in
Oh
this
my god!
country.
If you read even a little bit of the Gulag
Oh my
Archipelago, it
fucking
puts
God.
you have no right to. If you live
You
in
know,
the U.S. today, you have no right to complain at
complain
this
at
time
all.
about
Like,
anything.
go fucking, go read Alexander, or yeah,
Jesus
yeah, go read it.
Christ. The
Yeah.
things you would
Or
have to go to just to survive, the mental acuity you need in those bizarre situations
just
is
incredible.
unreal. It's fucking
I
unreal.
met, I've met
Please,
Don,
everybody, stop listening to this. Read that if you haven't already.
I've met Don Rickles. I met Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was a fucking hoot because I went backstage at the inaugural gala and I had the little staff pin on. It's kind of hard to see. had full access because I worked for the President of the United States. And it was the gala. My parents were in the audience. I said, "Excuse me, I'm going to go backstage for a little bit," purposely to see like who I would run into. And the very first person I ran into was Frank Sinatra, who was walking down a dark corridor backstage. And he looked at me and is like, here's this random. I'm like, let's see. On Inauguration Day, I was 20 years old. I probably looked 17, right? And he looked at me and
Checks out.
he goes, "Hey kid, what are you doing back here?" And I went, I was like, I was annoying him because I was just some kid, but it was great though. I fucking loved it. Like, "Hey kid, what are you doing back here?" And I like pointed at my staff and I went, I work for the president." It was like,
At this point, this will be one of the only edits that I will make. But Mark, I would like a picture of your White House badge, and we're going to flash it up.
okay.
That's not what I wanted him to do right this second.
So we're gonna have to do a bigger edit. Got it. Or leave it in. I don't know. Mark is all right. I think he meant later he's going to put it on the screen, but
Okay.
there you go. There you go. And I must say, can I see it again? Because I think you had a stash going on there.
I had,
Oh fuck yeah, dude! That's baller as shit. Look at that haircut, dude. Fuck yeah.
I had so much fucking
A
hair
drink
back
of that
then.
shit.
Mark, I'd like a picture of it. Can you snap a picture?
Sure.
Send it to me.
He's gonna edit it later.
Okay, and continue.
All right, but yeah, man, you've lived the life, and it's
So,
when I just want to tell when I met Mark and how he kind of got me interested in these things. I was always kind of interested in politics, psychology, why people do the thing that they do on the bigger level. Mark was the first like conservative / libertarian person I knew that made sense across the board, would call out the Republicans when they fucked up, didn't give a fuck, and would simply try to make sense at just a normal level when he talked about things. I'd not met that type of person before I met you.
and the first slanderous thing I said about Republicans to you, I believe, was because back then the Republican Party was like Bob Dole and and George H.W. Bush. And so those were John McCain. Those were like, yeah.
Country.
Josh, you were going to say?
Can you guys not hear me very well?
You're breaking up all the time.
You break up a little bit.
Okay, Country Club Republicans. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Country Club Republicans is good.
I called them root canal Republicans because everything they wanted to do hurt. We gotta cut the budget because like everything they wanted to do was pay. We gotta cut the budget. We gotta cut Social Security. We gotta cut Medicare.
Well, it was around, just to put it in perspective, around the time of right before the Iraq War, right? That was kind of the time frame.
Yeah, pretty much. And the leaders of the party back then, once again, were McCain, Bob Dole, Trent Lott, George, the Bush family.
But if I talk to people that I knew, Republican members of my family, they would just shit talking points out of their mouths that they would learn from just cable news, just like today. But you thought things through and had a real fucking opinion. I was like, oh shit, this guy's actually saying something that makes sense. He's thought about it. It's not a partisan view. He just happens to be.
And a lot of that had to do with my years in Washington. Like I knew who the frauds were.
Mm.
I mean, I met them all. I knew them all. Right. So
what did you when you were at the White House? What were your day-to-days? Like, what did you do on day-to-day?
What did I? So my first job at the White House, I was the president's political clearance specialist. So you got to staff a new administration, and there were 4 of us in an office who took the resumes, and we put them in 3 stacks. One stack was, 4 stacks. One stack was, have you ever worked for Ronald Reagan? And if you'd never worked for Ronald Reagan and didn't support him in 76 or 1980, you got put in stack number 4. If you supported Ronald Reagan in 76 or 80, one of the 2 campaigns, you got put in stack number 3. If you supported him in both presidential campaigns, you got put in stack number 2. And And if you supported him in both campaigns and knew him, you got put in stack or knew
What's the
us.
purpose of separating these stacks?
Well, because you want to stack your because you want to staff your administration with people that support your agenda.
Okay, gotcha. So you're
You
just
never support. You
prioritizing. It
never
was a
support.
prioritizing stack
Yeah, if
for.
you were a Nixon Ford retread, you'd been in Washington for 30 years, and you were just vying for a job in the Reagan administration, and you supported Gerald Ford over Ronald Reagan for the Republican nomination in 1976. You didn't get put in stack number one,
Hmm.
right?
That makes
I mean,
sense.
there were obviously a few exceptions to that, and the Bush people did get a lot of their own personnel in, and that's a whole different long other story.
I'm
But
sure you. Well, it's not like you had control over prioritization. Your job was to put them into these categories.
put them into priority, and then they went to presidential personnel. My second
Gotcha.
job was deputy special assistant to the president for political affairs. I worked for Lynn Nofziger, who was Reagan's press secretary all through his years as governor of California, and then during the campaign. And he was a cigar smoking, chomping, gin swilling old newspaper man who stormed the beaches at Normandy, got part of his hand blown off. He was literally one of the guys that was scaling the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, right, with people shooting at him, climbing up fucking rockside.
So
I mean,
he's slightly worse than who was a current one, Karine Jean Pierre.
oh my God. Um, and he became a newspaper when he went to college, went to San Jose after the war. Got a degree in journalism on the GI Bill and went to work for a newspaper. He was a newspaper man for a couple of decades and a bureau chief. And he saw something in Reagan in the early 1960s, and he went, you know what, this guy could be president one day. He could be. First thing he thought was, this guy should be governor of California. He's a very popular actor. Everybody, and he was at that point, was like Reagan was at like that the crossroads he was at, which was he'd been a lifelong FDR Democrat, but he was switching over. He was becoming a Republican because of a whole bunch of reasons, mostly, growth of the federal
You
government.
said your boss was named Kim Basinger?
Lynn Nofziger, Kim Basinger.
Lynn Nossinger. Okay, got you. Lynn Nossinger. There's something so, for lack of a better term, romantic about like a 70s, 80s bureau chief, hard hitting newspaper guy. Fucking phones are going off in the background. He's smoking a cigarette. He's got the fucking green visor hat on, writing down a bunch of shit like, no, news, but actually gives a shit about accuracy of the news. It wasn't propaganda. It was the news. That's gone
literally who, what, when, where, and
nowadays.
when. And when reporters asked a stupid question, he would go, "That's a stupid question." And everybody in Washington loved him because he was a straight shooter. So reporters loved him. Reporters didn't care that he was a Republican or a conservative. His closest friends were liberal reporters because he was no bullshit kind of guy. And back then, liberal reporters were kind of like the H.L. Mencken. The leftist reporters of the 1960s were kind of like H.L. Mencken type guys. Just don't fucking bullshit me, right?
So back then,
yeah,
you probably had a huge like mainstream reporters, ABC, NBC, and then you had some liberal, some conservative, but they had to be the fringe and the exceptions, not the rule. Does it seem like now it would just be?
There were no conservative reporters.
Okay.
They were virtually all Democrats.
Same as today. Same as today, basically.
Yeah, a smattering of, and of course they were yesteryear's Democrats. They were Jack Kennedy Democrats. They were Harry Truman Democrats. They weren't, men can have babies Democrats, right? Right? They weren't, they weren't today. They weren't remotely reflect like today's Democratic Party. But yeah, they were liberal, but they were straight shooters in their reporting. Like,
got it. And that's the important thing. It doesn't matter what side you're on if you're telling the truth.
John Dickerson is the CBS News anchor, and he cried. He cried on Jimmy Kimmel or one of the night shows over the fucking election. The only time I ever saw a newsman cry or come close to crying was Walter Cronkite when Jack Kennedy got assassinated. He didn't
You remember
cry.
the famous Hindenburg disaster? Even that guy, even though he was going, "Oh, the humanity," it didn't sound like he was crying. It
Right.
sounded like he was like being a man about it, even though
Holy
he's just
fuck.
watching people just fucking die right in front of him.
So we could dive back into so the reason why I got to long before I ever got to the White House, got to meet famous people and wasn't because my family had any money. Fighter pilot, my dad was a fighter pilot all of his life. We didn't have a lot of money.
World War II fighter pilot, which was the gangsterest of all fighter pilots, just
World
so you
War
all know.
II and
He
Korea,
flew what, an F4?
Mig Alley in Korea,
Flying
F-86,
Tigers.
Flying Tigers. Yeah, my dad was a Flying Tiger. My dad's the only man in the. My dad's the only pilot in the world that in the United States that has the air medal from the Army Air Corps and the U.S. Air Force,
Pretty
and
gangster.
he has the presidential citation, which he
And he
got right
was
before.
Pacific Theater,
Yeah,
correct?
the Flying Tigers fought the Jap.
Hey,
Yeah, I don't know the details of the Flying Tigers. Sorry.
do you still have his shadow box, or is that
He's getting up to get something.
he's going to get
I
it?
didn't know we could get up to get something. I would have thrown my drink a while ago. Are we allowed to, Josh?
No, we're not allowed. Okay.
God damn it. See, I'm here following the rules. Mark is there just because of his history and his impressive past. He can get up and fucking disobey the rules. That's pretty gangster.
It is pretty gangster, but I want pictures of it.
Yeah, he's gonna he's gonna put the picture in later. You're gonna have to go over there and take the picture for him. That's what's gonna have to happen.
Sure.
You should keep that in the podcast, though.
He said he's not editing anything. We're not editing shit.
We're not editing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, long before I ever met Ronald Reagan, which was all me, I did it on my own.
Why? Stop. How did you get to meet Ronald Reagan?
So in 1979, he had not yet announced he was going to run for the Republican primary, but I was wanting him to, and I supported him in '76. I say support. I was just a fucking kid, but I wanted him to win the Republican nomination in '76. Jerry Ford was the incumbent president. He took over for Nixon when Nixon resigned. Reagan was a very popular former two-term governor of California. The '76 convention was very dramatic. Reagan almost won the nomination. He almost wrestled it away from an incumbent president. The world was a very dangerous place because of the Cold War, and I wrote an op-ed that I sent to the. So back then, every city had, two newspapers: a morning edition and an evening edition. Sometimes they had the same name, morning edition, New York Times, whatever. We were stationed right outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio. So the morning paper was the Dayton Journal Herald, and the evening paper was the Dayton Daily News. I sent it to the editor of the editorial page of the Journal Herald, who published it. But because Cox owned 22 newspapers in the tri-state, it got published in 22 newspapers. Unbeknownst to me, and by sheer happenstance, by sheer pure fucking luck, Ronald Reagan was doing a swing through the tri-state, right, with Jimmy Stewart and Lynn Nofziger. And he was testing the waters for a presidential run, kind of. He was doing what he'd been doing for years, which was going to Lions clubs and chambers of commerce and giving speeches. And every town that he got to for 2 days, every newspaper. So a politician today gets to a town, he looks at his phone, and he reads about the town. Back then, a politician picked up the fucking newspaper and read it, right? You're going to be in the town, you read the newspaper. So Reagan goes to Dayton, Indianapolis, Columbus, etc. And for a day and a half or 2 days, the newspaper he picked up, above the fold, top left on the editorial page, was my op-ed, the title of which was "Superior Defense is Not Warmongering." I wanted Reagan to be the Republican nominee because I thought he was going to be the strongest on foreign policy and national defense.
Do you have a copy of that paper?
Yes, I have a copy of the article somewhere.
Is it?
Looks like I need to take another picture. You've got 3 pictures now to take. Keep track.
Yeah, I don't. That's probably in storage at your house, Josh. Anyway, or in your storage unit. So a day or two later, I'm at my mom and dad's. I paid for my college tuition, my first semester of college. The rule in my parents' house was, because we always worked, you got a job when you were a kid, and you had to save your money. So the rule was, if you pay for your tuition, You can live here for free, and we'll help you with books or whatever. I had already moved out of my parents' house, but they had typewriters. I was typing up. I was at my mom and dad's house in the dining room, typing up my school schedule because I don't have the best handwriting in the world. And the phone rang, and my mom came in the dining room. And she said, "There's a very strange and gruff-sounding man on the phone for you." And it was Lynn Nofziger. It was Ronald Reagan's press secretary. And one of the press aides had hopped off the plane. I think in New York, he said, and he needed a press assistant. He'd read my piece. The governor had read my piece. They liked the piece. In fact, this is like 1979, it's ages ago. So there was no vetting or, like look the guy up on Wikipedia or anything like that. They read a piece and went, yeah, I like this piece. Right? So I said, hello? And God is my witness. This is almost precisely what he said to me. He said, "Hey, kid, I read your article. Do you want a job?" I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "This is Lynn Nofziger. Do you know who I am?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "The governor read your piece. I read your piece. I need a press assistant. Do you want to come to California and help me get Ronald Reagan elected the next president of the United States?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Can you be in California first thing Monday morning?" I said, "Yes." I just kept saying yes or whatever he said. Right? And I was like pinching myself. It was like a fucking dream, right? And nobody had fax machines back then, but people had, like in government offices, you had what were called telexes. And it was, you put the phone on, the machine was like huge, And he said, "Do you know anybody with a telex?" I said, "Yeah, my dad's got one in his office at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base." He said, "Here's my number. Call me back with your old man's telex number, and I'll send you a confirmation letter."
So telex is a fax machine, more or less?
Telex was the precursor to the fax machine.
Got it. Understood.
Okay. And my father came home from the base that day with a letter on Reagan stationery. And it already started to fade because on the old thermal paper, I had thermal paper back then when it started to fade. Thermal paper is like what you get on a receipt right now, right? At CVS, right? Thermal paper, right? And all it said was, "This confirms your appointment with Governor Reagan Monday morning, 9 o'clock at Rancho del Cielo." Signed, Lynn Nofziger. On Reagan. And my father looked at me, he goes, "Would you mind telling me what the fuck is going on?" I said, "I'm going to go to California and work for Ronald Reagan." He goes, "What in the goddamn fuck are you going to do for Ronald Reagan?" My dad, the colonel, my dad, the fighter pilot, who's completely, he didn't make the connection of he knew my piece was published. He was like, "Oh yeah, that's nice. Hey Dad, look, I got published." Right? But he still hadn't clicked yet. I said, "The governor read my piece. Lynn Nofziger read my piece. I said, "I'm going to go be a press assistant for Ronald Reagan." He goes, "What do you know about being a press assistant?" I said, "Nothing, but I'm going to do it anyway." Right? It was surreal. And he said, it was like, "You already paid for your college, blah, blah, blah." Once I convinced him that I didn't care about losing my non-refundable tuition, that Lynn Nofziger had asked me to come to California and work for Ronald Reagan, I was going to do it. He got, fighter pilots maps, etc. Got the map, got a big U.S. map out, said, "You stupid fuck, it's Thursday afternoon. You're going to have to leave tonight no later than midnight, and if you're fucking lucky, you will pull into Southern California sometime around sundown on Sunday. And that's if you drive straight fucking through. Let me show you how to do that." So he mapped out my route for me. I put everything I could fit in my brand new Toyota SR5 and drove to California. And I got my 8 minutes with the governor at the ranch, which was, of course, he kind of remembered, he's a very busy man. It's like, "Oh yeah, that's the kid that wrote the article." And it's like, "Well, Mark, it's nice to meet you, and Lynn's a good boss, and he's a good man, and welcome aboard." And I was just like sitting there like dumbfounded. I was like, I didn't fucking believe it. But I worked for Ronald Reagan. So Lynn takes me out to the press trailer because the ranch had 2 trailers, which is the press operation. There was a press operation downtown in Century City also, which was like Citizens for the Republic. It was a little Reagan, it was called, it wasn't even Reagan for President Committee yet, right? Because he hadn't announced yet. And took me out to the press trailer, and he gave me 4 4x6 index cards and said, "I need a press release for each one of these." And took me to a cubicle that had an IBM Selectric 2 typewriter, which is a self-correcting typewriter, which I'd never seen before. I was a very good typist because I took typing in high school, and I'd never written a press release before. I had no idea what I was doing. And one of them was Reagan's going to meet with the Hispanic Coalition in Sacramento on Wednesday the 22nd. Governor Reagan's going to meet with former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to talk about foreign policy on Thursday the 29th, etc. Right? Who, what, when, where, why. So I typed up these 4 terrible press releases with too many words and, too flowery sounding. And I handed them to Lynn. Now, this is Lynn, who got shot at with real bullets on the fucking beach on D-Day, right? Cigar chomping, gin swilling, barrel-chested motherfucker, newspaper man. And he had been an editor and a bureau chief. And editors and bureau chiefs use red ink, right, to cross out what they don't like in a copy. And so I gave him my press releases. And about 4 minutes later, his door flew open. He walked, looked like he slit his wrists on these 4 pieces of paper I handed him. He said, "What in the goddamn fuck is this shit?" And threw that at me. Little did I know I was being tested. I had no idea I was being tested. And he goes, "What in the goddamn fuck is this shit? This is the worst fucking shit I've ever read in my whole fucking life. I thought you knew how to write, kid." And he was just bawling me out. He's yelling at me. He's like, "Jesus fucking Christ, kid. This is what the fuck?" And he's reading, parts like, "What the fuck?" Right? And the whole time I'm going, "Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Knopfler, I'll do it over again. I'll write this one over again." He's like, "I don't want you to write it over again. I want you to get the fuck out of here." Right? I was devastated. Like, a part of me wanted to cry, but I'm a fighter pilot's son, so I didn't cry. Right? And his confidential assistant, the great Rosemary Monk, came up behind me. She heard all this, and she put her hands on the back of my shoulders. She leaned down and she goes, "He's really just a big teddy bear." I said, "He's a big something." And he went in his office and slammed the door. And Lynn always had his tie down at half mast and his shirt like half untucked. And he kicked his loafers off in the morning. He walked around the office in his stocking feet, and he kicked the door open with his stocking foot about 5 minutes later, and he walked out about 3 or 4 feet, and he's got his cigarette. "Hey, kid, come here." So I got it very meekly, and he shuttled me into the door, and he closed the door, and he goes, "Sit down." I sat down, and he goes, "I'm going to teach you how to write." He spent about 45 minutes with me. He's like, "Who, what, when, where, and why. That's all I fucking want. No jabbery, no angels. This is what a press release is." Right? And in 45 minutes, I was the best press release writer in the country because I learned from the very best. And I didn't know it at that time that his ass chewing on me was partly to test to see, what have I got here? I got somebody that's going to, crumble, right? And the other part was that I didn't learn until months later was that Lynn had 2 daughters, and he was kind of a gruff guy, wasn't much of a daughter dad, and I think he always wanted a son, and I was the nice boy from Ohio, and I kind of got to be like a son to him. He became like a father to me.
Man, that was a fantastic story. I have never heard that before, and I would have thrown up all over the place as soon as he started yelling at me. Just all over the place. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Basinger." That's what I would have done.
That the final line, the final thing he said to me in that ass chewing was, "Who the fuck are you?" I went, "I'm the boy from Ohio whose article you read."
Dude, I'm so glad that you told me that, man. I can't believe I didn't know that story earlier, but man, that's probably a good place to put a pin because that was good.
Yeah. So,
Josh is going to stop right now, and we're going to go to part 2 at a later date.